Hi there, I'm Maribel. My parents gave away the house I grew up in to my sister. Then they moved me into the garage, like some forgotten storage box they didn't want to throw away just yet. They told themselves it was temporary. But then came the guest lists I wasn't on, the family photos without me, the business loan I never agreed to. But they used the house to get it. Was it just thoughtlessness, or something far worse? And what happened when I finally made one call? Let me tell you what they never expected I'd do next. I pulled into the driveway just after noon. The gravel under my tires crackled like it didn't recognize me. The house hadn't changed much on the outside. Same porch swing, same worn shutters. But I knew better than to think it was the same house I left years ago. Familiarity, I've learned, is not the same thing as belonging. Clara, my mother, stepped out onto the porch with a folded dish towel in her hand. She offered me a smile that was polite, not warm. She didn't hug me, just nodded like we were neighbors and said, "You'll be in the den for now. Lorene's using the guest room with the kids." I didn't ask why. I'd already packed with the assumption I wouldn't be truly welcome. I walked past her, wheeling the single suitcase I'd brought with me, not because I planned to travel light, but because I didn't expect to stay long. Inside, the house smelled like citrus cleaning spray and lavender plug-ins. Clara hated open windows, said fresh air dragged in dust. I took a deep breath anyway, hoping something of my childhood would drift through. It didn't. The den still had the same green recliner my father loved, but the couch had been replaced with a pull-out. No photos, no bookshelves, no remnants of who I was. She gestured toward it and said, "The sheets are clean. There's a fan in the corner if you get warm." I thanked her and sat down, listening to the distant hum of a dryer somewhere. No one else came to greet me. Not my father, not Lorene, not even the kids I'd seen in family holiday cards. I assumed they were upstairs. Or maybe not. Maybe I'd stopped being family the minute I stepped away years ago. After I set my bag down, I asked, "Is my old room still there?" My voice cracked a little, but I hoped she didn't catch it. Clara tilted her head. "Oh, we converted it. Lorene needed space for her yoga stuff and storage for the kids' clothes. You understand, right?" I nodded. That was always the rule in this house. You nod. You don't ask again. You make yourself smaller so others can stretch their legs. Still, I walked down the hallway. My hand grazed the frame of the door that used to be mine. The paint was newer, the smell synthetic. I opened it. The room was unrecognizable. A rubber mat covered the hardwood floor I used to slide across in socks. Boxes lined the walls, neatly labeled Lorene, Summer, Kids, Toys, Workout Bands. Where my desk had been, there was now a standing shelf of aromatherapy diffusers and dumbbells. The bookshelf my grandfather built when I was 10 was gone. When I asked about it, Clara said, "We donated it. No one was using it anymore." I wanted to say it wasn't just a bookshelf. It was a piece of memory, soaked in childhood sleepovers and late-night journal entries. But I stayed silent. My silence was easier for them to manage. Dinner that night was chili from a crock pot. We sat around the table, me, Clara, Harland, and Lorene, who arrived 10 minutes late in yoga pants and a blazer. She talked about expanding her wellness brand, casually mentioning a new location in Portland. She looked at me once and said, "You'll feel better now that you're back to simplicity. There's something freeing about not having to manage everything, isn't there?" I didn't respond. Harlan spooned more chili into his bowl and said nothing. I couldn't tell if that was his way of keeping peace or avoiding discomfort. Maybe both. Lorene kept going. "Resetting can be such a gift. You're lucky, really. Not everyone gets the chance to rebuild." It wasn't sarcasm. That's what made it worse. After the dishes were cleared, I sat on the back steps by myself. The night air was cool, soft against my cheeks. Somewhere inside, Lorene's kids giggled over something on a screen. Clara vacuumed upstairs, her rhythm mechanical. Harland watched the news in his recliner, volume turned low. No one came out. No one asked how I was adjusting. No one offered a blanket. Later, when I lay down on the pullout, The mattress creaked under me. The ceiling fan above spun with a lazy rhythm, the kind that doesn't cool, just moves air from corner to corner. I stared at the ceiling for a long time. My bag sat unpacked. There wasn't really a drawer to use anyway. From the hallway, I heard Lorene's laugh echo. Sharp, vibrant, full of life. I turned to face the wall and whispered, more to myself than anyone else. I came home. And somehow, I'm the one who doesn't belong. I didn't expect a red carpet, but I didn't think I'd be sent to the garage either. It was just after 7 the next morning when Clara tapped gently on the den door. I was already awake, had been for a while. The ceiling fan had done little through the night besides shuffle around the warm air, and I'd spent most of it staring into the dark, wondering when I'd started being treated like a guest in my own family. Clara didn't come all the way in. She stayed in the doorway like she was checking in on a sleeping child. "Lorene didn't sleep well," she said, her voice coated in that soft, well-practiced maternal tone she used when she didn't want to sound like she was giving orders. "You know how she gets when she's this far along." I sat up slowly, rubbing my shoulder where the metal bar under the mattress had left its mark. "Is everything all right?" "We were thinking," she said, eyes drifting anywhere but mine. "Just for now, you could move into the garage. It's quieter, more private. You'd have your own space. Lorene really needs rest." "Isn't that where we keep the old garden tools and the paint cans?" I asked, trying to smile so it wouldn't come off as a protest. She gave a shrug, half nod. "We moved most of it. It's tidy now. It'll be fine. There's a little heater, and I put some shelves up for you." There was no discussion, just the kind of statement framed as a favor to me, but clearly done to make someone else more comfortable. I didn't push back. I just nodded and got up to pack the few things I'd unpacked the night before. The garage door was already open when I stepped out. Morning air carried the smell of damp leaves and fertilizer. A twin-sized cot sat against the back wall, next to a small plastic dresser, and a lamp that looked like it had been pulled from a yard sale. A single extension cord snaked its way across the concrete to power the lamp and a humming space heater. The window near the ceiling didn't open. There was no insulation, just drywall that still showed patches from when my father had tried to hang shelves and given up halfway. I set my bag down and sat on the cot. The springs let out a sound that reminded me of the creaky swing set we'd had as kids, the one that had been taken down the year Lorene went to college. My name had never been carved into that frame either. I stayed there most of the day. No one checked in. No one offered help setting things up. Around 5, I heard footsteps on the gravel outside. I straightened up a little, hoping it might be someone coming to talk. Instead, Lorene's friend appeared at the side door, holding a bag of pastel-colored gift wrap. She looked inside and blinked when she saw me folding a basket of laundry. "Oh, sorry, I thought this was the laundry room. Are you the nanny? Or—" Before I could say a word, Lorene came up behind her. "She's just helping out for a while," she said with a practiced smile. No correction. No, that's my sister. Just a gentle, dismissive cover story to explain away my existence. I didn't correct her either. I just nodded once and kept folding the same towel I'd already refolded twice. The friend gave a quick, awkward smile and disappeared inside with the bag. Lorene didn't say anything else. She just followed her in, chatting about some new product line and a podcast interview. That evening, I made myself a sandwich in the kitchen, careful not to use the good dishes. Clara passed behind me at one point and said, "There's leftover quiche in the fridge." "I'm fine," I replied. I didn't want a favor. I wanted a place. Back in the garage, I sat on the edge of the cot, chewing slowly. The heater rattled and groaned like it might give out at any minute. A raccoon rustled through the trash outside, its claws scraping the plastic lid of the bin. When I finished eating, I pulled a dusty photo album from the plastic bin I'd brought with me. The pages stuck a little, the plastic yellowed from age. There I was, on the edge of the family vacation photo in Yosemite, half turned and half out of frame. At my high school graduation, standing behind Lorene, who was front and center with both parents' arms around her. Even in the Christmas photo, I was off to the side, cropped in like a placeholder. They didn't need to erase me. They'd already edited me out. I stayed up longer than I should have that night, staring at the warped ceiling of the garage, trying not to think. But when the thoughts come quietly, they settle deep. By morning, I'd told myself to let it go, that this was temporary, that I was just overreacting. But temporary has a way of stretching itself thin until it covers a whole season. 3 days later, Clara decided to throw a small dinner gathering. She called it a family appreciation night, something to celebrate Lorene's pregnancy and Harland stepping away from full-time work. It was nothing fancy. Some catered platters, paper lanterns strung across the back patio, a few folks from town invited over. I assumed I'd help with setup, cleanup, and smile politely, like usual. That afternoon, I laid out forks and napkins on the long table in the backyard, careful to keep the spacing even. I heard them inside rehearsing. Lorene had written something she wanted to say after dinner. A few heartfelt words, she called it. When the guests arrived, I didn't recognize most of them. Church friends, Lorene's business contacts, one of Harlan's old buddies from the construction firm. No one looked twice at me. I stayed in motion, refilling water pitchers, tossing salad, gathering empty glasses. After dessert, Clara stood up and tapped her wineglass with a spoon. We're so grateful to have everyone here tonight. This family's been through a lot, and we're blessed to have people around us who've lifted us through it. She smiled at Lorene, who rose with a note card in her hand. Her voice was confident, clear. She looked around the table and began. To the people who've stood by us, held this house together, who raised me, guided me, and believed in me. The words floated, wrapped in her charm, her timing perfect. She thanked their mother for her endless support. She praised Harland for his steady guidance. She even mentioned a few community members by name for being second families when things got hard. Not once did my name leave her lips. I'd driven Clara to her physical therapy appointments twice a week for months. I'd scrubbed the floor when Harland was sick and vomiting in the hallway. I'd cleaned up the backyard before the guests arrived, and I was invisible. When she finished, the table applauded. I kept clapping just a second longer than I needed to, just enough to keep my hands moving while I blinked a little faster. I glanced around. Odessa hadn't been invited. If she had, she would have caught it. She always saw what others pretended not to. After the last guests left and Clara headed to the kitchen with Lorene to put leftovers away, I wandered down the hallway. I didn't really know why. Maybe just to be somewhere quiet. I ended up in the main corridor where the family wall used to be. They'd redone it. The photos were all new, clean frames, matching colors, symmetrical arrangement. Lorene's wedding portrait took center position. On either side, pictures of her children. Harland and Clara's anniversary photo, one of Harland with Lorene at a local ribbon-cutting ceremony. A shot of Lorene's husband holding their youngest near a pumpkin patch. Not a single picture of me. Not even the one from high school graduation that used to hang by the thermostat. That frame now held a close-up of Lorene's daughter wearing oversized sunglasses. I leaned in, half hoping I'd just missed myself somewhere, even in the background. I hadn't. My image, my presence, was gone. And I realized it wasn't an oversight. It was an edit. Back in the garage, I changed into an old sweatshirt and sat on the cot, the space heater rumbling in the corner. I wrapped the sleeves around my waist and stared at the wall. I thought about every errand, every load of laundry, every dinner I cooked without being asked. Then I remembered something Lorene used to say in high school when she got caught lying. You can't blame people for telling a cleaner version of the truth. It's just better that way. I guess she still believed that. I reached for the photo album again, but paused. Instead, I opened the bottom drawer of the plastic dresser and pulled out a frame I hadn't touched since I moved in. It was a picture of me in 5th grade, standing beside Grandma Ruth at the local fall fair. We were both laughing. My hair was wild, hers was in a tight bun, and we were holding matching caramel apples. It was the one photo where I was centered, arms around someone who actually saw me. I wrapped the frame in a scarf and tucked it into my bag. If I didn't exist in their version of the story, maybe it was time I wrote my own. The next morning, I left early. I didn't wait for anyone to ask where I was going. I slipped out through the side door with a scarf wrapped around my neck and my hands stuffed deep in my coat pockets. The sun hadn't fully come up yet, and the grass was still wet from the sprinklers. It was cold enough to see my breath, but I welcomed the quiet. I walked the length of the neighborhood twice, circling back only when I figured they'd all be busy with their routines. Lorene on a client call, Clara planning dinner, Harlan tinkering in the shed like always. I needed space before I could go back into that house. When I returned, I entered through the garage, took off my coat, and walked into the kitchen to rinse out my thermos. Lorene's son, Mason, was standing near the counter with another boy around his age, probably a school friend. They were eating crackers and giggling over something on his phone. The other boy looked up at me first. Then Mason followed his gaze and pointed, like he was stating a fact. "That's the lady who lives in the garage." The other kid blinked. "Is she like your grandma or something?" Mason shook his head. "Nah, she's not family. Right, Mom?" Lorene had just stepped into the room, holding a bag of folded towels. She didn't look up. She didn't say anything to correct them. She smiled, tight, polite, and changed the subject entirely. "Why don't you two go outside and play before it gets too hot?" They ran off laughing, and I stood there, still holding the thermos under the faucet. The water had started to overflow. I turned it off quietly, set the cup aside, and walked back out to the garage before anyone could ask how I felt about being referred to like I was a stray cat. That's how stories are written in families like mine. Casually, out loud, and left uncorrected. I spent the rest of the day avoiding eye contact. I stayed busy, organized a few of my old files, wrote some notes, took a long walk down to the park, and sat on a bench for an hour doing nothing in particular. It wasn't about hiding, it was about staying out of the way. But after dinner, Clara caught me in the hallway. I'd passed on eating with them, claiming I had a headache. She asked, "You're okay out there in the garage, aren't you?" I gave her a small smile. "It's fine." She hesitated. "Your sister's been under a lot of stress. The business, the baby. She's really stepped up for this family." There it was. I asked softly, "And I haven't?" Clara looked away. She's taken on so much. She's the one carrying this family right now." I waited, for anything else, for a single word of recognition. For her to remember the drives to doctor's appointments, the nights I stayed up with her while she had panic attacks during Harlan's surgery, the meals I cooked, the bills I paid when they were behind on utilities last year. She didn't say any of that. She just sighed and walked away. I stood there for a while, long after the conversation had ended, watching the light under the bathroom door flicker from someone inside. My feet hurt, my chest felt heavy, but my head was clear. They'd already made up their minds. I didn't argue, I didn't beg. I started walking more. Every afternoon, I'd grab my shoes and just go. No explanation, no return time. I stopped replying to Lorene's texts when she asked me to pick up milk or grab the mail. I didn't stop helping, I just stopped being available on command. At meals, I kept my earbuds in and nodded when spoken to. If Harlan asked about the heater, I told him it worked fine. If Clara asked if I wanted leftovers, I told her no, thank you. I wasn't angry in a loud way. I just started pulling myself out of the scenes they didn't realize I'd never belonged in. One evening, I sat on the back porch after they'd all gone to bed. I opened an old notebook I hadn't touched in years. The paper smelled faintly of cedar and coffee. I flipped to a clean page and began to write. It wasn't poetry or anything elegant, just pieces of thoughts. I wrote, "If I don't belong to them, maybe I belong to the part of myself I forgot to defend." It was the first sentence I'd written for myself in a long time. Later that night, lying on the cot with the hum of the heater keeping rhythm, I opened the notebook again. I only wrote one more line, but I pressed the pen down hard enough that it almost tore the page. If you keep cutting me out, don't be surprised when I stop bleeding. The next morning came heavy, like the air was trying to hold me in place. I moved slower than usual, not out of tiredness, but out of deliberation. Every step felt measured. I made myself a mug of coffee in the kitchen before anyone else was up, drinking it in silence with my back to the window. I knew about the baby shower before they said a word. Clara had left the invitation list on the counter next to a stack of envelopes. I wasn't on it. Neither was Odessa. I didn't say anything when I saw it. I just read it once, set it down, and rinsed out my cup. The day of the shower arrived like any other, but the energy inside the house was different, brighter, buzzier. Lorene's friends showed up in sundresses and heels, carrying pastel gift bags and store-bought cupcakes stacked in careful towers. Harlan grilled. Clara fussed with tablecloths. No one asked me to help, but I still refilled the lemonade and set out extra forks. I wasn't invisible that day. I was background, the kind of presence you see out of the corner of your eye and choose not to acknowledge because it's easier that way. I stayed mostly in the hallway, coming and going through the side entrance, making myself small, but that didn't shield me from what I heard. One woman, probably one of Lorene's colleagues, stepped into the hallway with her phone out, snapping photos of the setup. "Lorene!" she called out with a grin. "This guest room is better decorated than most hotels I've stayed in." Lorene laughed, loud enough for the entire kitchen to hear. "Oh, we keep the garage for special guests," she said, pausing just long enough to let it land. "Like my sister." The room roared. Light-hearted laughter bounced off the walls like a tennis ball no one wanted to catch. I froze. I wasn't shocked. Not really. What stunned me was how smooth it came out of her mouth. How easily she turned me into a punchline for people who didn't even know my name. I didn't say anything. I didn't make a scene. I walked into the garage, grabbed my coat, and left. No slamming doors, no slammed words. I didn't come back until dusk. By then, the backyard lights were dimmed. The music had been turned off. Paper plates littered the patio table. Clara was inside wiping down counters. Lorene was upstairs. Harlan sat in his chair, TV flickering across his face. I stood in the garage, door still cracked open behind me, staring at the string of lights above the lawn. The same ones we used to hang for 4th of July. I used to think they made the house look magical. Now they just made it look staged. Later that night, I called Clara and Harlan into the kitchen. They came eventually. I didn't sit. I didn't offer coffee or soften my tone. "I've been quiet for too long," I began. "That ends tonight." They looked at each other, then at me. "I live in the garage," I said. "I get left out of family gatherings. I watch you hang pictures of everyone but me. I hear you joke about where I sleep. And I let it slide, again and again, because I kept telling myself maybe you didn't mean it." I paused, then continued. "But you do mean it. You meant all of it. And I'm done pretending otherwise." Harlan scoffed. "You're lucky we let you stay at all." Clara's eyes widened, but she didn't say anything. "This house doesn't belong to you anymore," he added flatly. "That was decided a long time ago." I nodded once. "I know." From the hallway, Lorene stood halfway down the stairs, arms crossed, watching like she was evaluating a performance. I looked her in the eye, then turned back to my parents. "You've made it clear I don't belong here," I said. "But just so we're all clear, I'm not going to sit in the corner anymore and play dumb while you erase me." No one responded, no apologies, no arguments, just the kind of silence that confirms everything you already knew. That night, I pulled out my phone and took photos. Quietly, without fanfare. I documented every item in the house that used to be mine. The quilt Grandma Ruth had sewn by hand, now folded over the back of Lorene's couch. A framed certificate I received in high school, half buried in a utility drawer next to some expired batteries. Even the ceramic figurine I'd painted as a kid, now tucked behind a row of essential oil bottles in the bathroom. I wasn't doing it out of spite. I was collecting what little proof remained that I'd once had a place here. I opened a folder on my phone and titled it, Proof I Existed. Before I went to bed, I gathered some of my old paperwork and began organizing it on the fold-out table in the garage. Tax documents, school records, even receipts from bills I'd paid on the house years ago. I didn't know exactly what I was looking for, but something told me I'd need these soon. I zipped everything into a small file bag and slid it under the cot. Then I stepped outside and stood on the driveway, facing the house. Every light inside was on. People only leave every light on when they want a place to look warm, or when they're trying to blind themselves to what they don't want to see. If this place isn't mine, I whispered to no one, then they shouldn't be using pieces of me to decorate it. The wind had picked up overnight, scattering pine needles across the driveway by the time I stepped outside the next morning. I'd barely slept, but I wasn't tired. Something in me had shifted, steadied, the quiet kind of clarity that usually follows a storm. I made coffee in the kitchen while Clara sorted through a pile of grocery flyers at the table. She didn't say anything, neither did I. Just the clink of my spoon against the inside of the mug broke the silence. As I poured the last of the cream, I heard Lorene's voice floating in from the living room. "I've handled everything since moving in," she was saying to a woman I didn't recognize. "Mom and Dad couldn't keep up on their own, not with all the appointments and house stuff. I took over all of it." The woman made some agreeable noise. I didn't catch the rest. I just stood there, still stirring, my eyes fixed on the ripple in my coffee. Handled everything? I thought about the time I spent on hold with the insurance company when Clara's claim was denied. About the doctor's office visits, the bank trips, the errands in the rain when no one else had time. That was the thing about being useful. If no one sees it, it's as if it never happened. I took my cup and walked out without a word. Later that afternoon, while returning the vacuum to the hallway closet, I passed by Harlan's office. The door was ajar, just enough to hear his voice. He was on the phone. His tone was firm, practiced. "Yes." The appraisal came back clean. "We'll be signing everything Tuesday. It's just a short-term lien, secured by the house. Nothing unusual." I stood there, frozen. I didn't move until the call ended and he closed the door behind him. That evening, Clara and I crossed paths in the hallway. She looked unusually upbeat, holding a grocery list. "Did you know Lorene's husband is opening another studio?" she said, casual as anything. "They're using the house, just temporarily, to get the loan through. It'll be fine." I stared at her, letting the words hit one by one. "Using the house?" I repeated. She nodded like it was already settled. "It's standard business these days. Everything's under control." "No one told me." She blinked, almost like she hadn't expected me to respond. "Did anyone think to ask?" I said again, this time sharper. Harlan came around the corner and stopped when he saw us. "You weren't on the deed," he said plainly. "Why would we?" And that was it. That was the moment I stopped waiting for kindness and started preparing for facts. I spent the next few hours in the garage sorting through old boxes, papers I hadn't looked at in years, utility bills with my name, property tax statements where I was listed as co-payer, receipts from a roof repair. I coordinated back when a storm knocked out half the shingles. I laid everything on the fold-out table, flattening corners, arranging them by date. I took photos of each document with my phone, uploading them into a secure drive. Then I called Dana. She used to work with a real estate lawyer before switching careers. We hadn't talked in a while, but she picked up on the second ring. "Hey," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "I have a question about property law." There was a pause. "Okay, that's a new one. If someone lived in a house for years, paid taxes, covered repairs, even paid down part of the mortgage, do they have any legal standing if the property was transferred without their knowledge?" "You talking about your parents' place?" "Yes." "You might. Depends on how clean the paperwork was. You'll want to check title history, timelines, anything that proves active contribution. You'd need to file a notice of interest at the very least. Why? They're using the house as collateral for Lorene's husband's business loan. No one told me. Dana let out a long breath. Send me everything. I'll look at it tonight. I thanked her and ended the call. By midnight, I'd scanned and sent everything I had. Receipts, bills, my personal statement, even a signed card from Harland 5 years ago that said, "Thanks for covering the property taxes this quarter. We would have been in trouble without you." I didn't sleep much. At 2:17 a.m., I opened a new email and typed "urgent property question" into the subject line. I attached 3 of the most relevant documents. I hovered over the send button. "If they think silence is consent," I whispered to the glow of the screen, "they're about to learn otherwise." Then I clicked. By sunrise, the garage felt colder than usual. The air was still, but not in a peaceful way. It was the kind of quiet you feel before something breaks. I made coffee, checked my email, and waited. It didn't take long. At 9:03 a.m., Dana replied. Her message was short, but the words stuck in my chest like pins. "The deed was transferred 6 months ago. You're not on it. Lorene is listed as sole owner. You'll want to talk to someone about this, soon." 6 months ago, I had been driving Clara to follow-ups after her surgery, managing their grocery lists, and patching the backyard fence because Harlan didn't want to deal with it. I was in and out of pharmacies, filling prescriptions. I slept in that house more nights than I slept anywhere else. I didn't get a call, not a mention, not a signature request, not even a heads up. I sat with the email for a few minutes, my fingers tapping the edge of my mug. When the silence inside the garage became too loud, I stood up, grabbed my jacket, and walked through the house without knocking. Harland was sitting at the kitchen table with a newspaper and half a banana. He looked up as I entered, barely lowering the paper. "I have a question," I said calmly, though my voice had lost all softness. He grunted. "Go ahead." "The house. You signed it over to Lorene 6 months ago?" He blinked slowly. "It was time." "Time for what?" I asked. "To erase me legally, since the emotional part didn't take?" Harlan shrugged. "You were never on the title. And that's your excuse?" "It's not an excuse, it's a fact," he said, his tone clipped. I heard footsteps on the stairs, and there she was. Lorene, dressed in her usual Lululemon, sipping something green from a mason jar. She didn't stop walking, just slowed enough to throw a line over her shoulder. "You were a visitor, Maribel, not a stakeholder. Why would anyone loop in someone just crashing?" I let out a breath, not out of exasperation, but to keep myself from laughing. The kind of laugh that comes not from humor, but disbelief. "No," I said. "I wasn't crashing. I was cleaning, driving, fixing, paying, and you all knew that." Harlan folded his paper. "It's done. You can either accept it or keep playing the victim." I stood there for a few seconds more, scanning both of their faces. They didn't look ashamed. They looked rehearsed. Later that evening, as dusk painted the sky, orange and blue, Odessa showed up. No call, no warning. Just the sound of her knock on the side door of the garage. I opened it, startled. "Hey," she said, holding a worn envelope. "I think you're going to want this." I stepped aside, and she came in, placing the envelope on the table. Her hands trembled a little. "I was sorting through some of Mom's old recipe books. This was tucked inside one of them." I opened it. It was her handwriting, Grandma Ruth's, dated nearly a year before she passed. "If anything happens to me before I can finish the legal documents," it read, "let this letter stand as my clear intent. The west half of the property, Maribel's, because she is the one who still sees this house as home, not a transaction." I sat down. The words blurred at the edges, but I kept reading it over and over again. Odessa exhaled. "Clara was the executor, right? That means she either never saw this or saw it and didn't act." I nodded slowly, rage creeping in like a steady tide. She saw it, I said. We sat in silence for a while. The heater kicked on, a soft hum in the background. I don't know if it's legally binding, I whispered, more to myself than her. Doesn't need to be, she replied. You show this to the right people, and it creates enough doubt to make Lorene sweat. That night, I stayed up until after midnight again. I scanned the letter, saved it to the same cloud folder I'd created for all my documents, and started building a timeline. I listed everything: dates, repairs, appointments, who said what and when. I pulled up property records, downloaded PDFs, and flagged discrepancies. Then I drafted a short narrative. I wasn't trying to win in court, not yet. I just wanted the truth on record. Before I shut my laptop, I opened a new message and attached the scanned letter. I didn't put my name on the email. I didn't have to. The recipient, Lorene's main business investor. I'd found his email linked to the press release from her last studio launch. In the subject line, I typed, "Question regarding property transfer plus pending loan." I hit send. Then I closed the lid, turned off the light, and whispered to the dark, "Let's see how stable her image stays when the cracks become public." The morning after I sent the anonymous email, I woke up before the sun. The garage was still, save for the faint hum of the heater cycling on. I stayed under the covers a moment longer, listening. I wasn't nervous, I wasn't afraid. I felt like a wire pulled tight, finally ready to snap back. By mid-morning, I was parked outside the small law office in town. I had called ahead and asked to speak with a mediator. Not a litigator, not yet. I didn't want war, I wanted boundaries, and I wanted them enforced by someone who didn't share my blood. We sat in a small room that smelled faintly of printer toner and old carpet. I explained my situation plainly, without dramatics, just the facts. I laid out the scanned letter from Grandma Ruth, the tax records, the caretaking notes I had kept without even realizing why. The attorney listened quietly, occasionally jotting something down. He leaned back once I finished and said, "We can't reverse the deed outright with just this, but we can file a notice of interest on the property. It's a formal declaration that you're disputing the legitimacy of the transfer. It doesn't change ownership, but it prevents them from selling or refinancing until your claim is reviewed." "That's what I want," I said. He nodded. "It'll be filed this afternoon." Back at the garage, I opened the windows to let the air move through for the first time in weeks. I didn't bother hiding what I was doing anymore. If Clara asked, I'd tell her. But she didn't ask. Neither did Harland. They must have known something was coming. By early evening, I overheard Lorene's voice carry through the floorboards. "What do you mean he backed out?" She snapped on the phone. There was a pause. Then her voice again, louder. "Pending clarification? Clarification of what?" I didn't need to hear the rest. I knew who he was. Her investor. I closed the window and waited. The knock on the garage door came 30 minutes later. "Family meeting?" Harlan called through the crack. I followed him inside without a word. Clara was already seated at the kitchen table, hands folded tightly. Lorene leaned against the counter, arms crossed, lips pressed so tight they were barely there. Harland opened. "You sent something to Lorene's investor?" I didn't blink. "Yes." "Why?" Clara asked, voice barely above a whisper. "Because you all decided I didn't matter," I said, "and I needed someone outside this house to see that I do." Lorene scoffed, stepping forward. "You were never meant to stay here, Maribel. You made your life a mess and then tried to crawl back into mine." I looked at her square in the eye. "I didn't crawl. I walked in. You just kept locking every door behind me." The silence was thick. Nobody moved. Then I reached into my bag and pulled out the printed copies of the letter, the one from Grandma Ruth, and placed them carefully on the table, one in front of each of them. "I'm not trying to take anything that was never mine," I said, "but I won't let you keep what was." Clara stared at the paper like it might bite her. Harlan didn't touch his. Lorene glanced at hers, then rolled her eyes. I don't care what some dead woman wrote, she muttered. You should, I said, because she's the only one in this family who ever made me feel like I mattered. With that, I turned and walked out. Not in anger, not in defeat, but in certainty. Odessa was waiting in her car by the curb, engine running. We didn't speak until we were halfway across town. Where to? She asked. Anywhere with room to breathe, I replied. That night, I stayed at Odessa's for the first time since all of this began. She had set up a cot in her art studio. There were brushes in jars and half-finished pottery on shelves. It smelled like clay and oil paint and safety. Before bed, I stepped outside with a cup of tea. Her porch light flickered as I looked back toward the direction of the house. Their house. The house that used to feel like home. They tried to bury me in the garage, I said softly, almost to myself. But I grew roots instead. The next morning, I woke to the scent of cinnamon and brewed coffee drifting through Odessa's studio. It wasn't a luxury, just her regular routine, but it felt like warmth, like breath. I sat on the cot a while before moving, watching the morning light creep across the concrete floor. Nothing in me wanted to run anymore. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't chasing recognition or begging for space. Over the next few weeks, life didn't explode. It didn't unravel or collapse. It just slowed, quieted. I started helping Odessa sort her art supplies. Sometimes I'd raid next to the kiln while she worked. Other days, I took long walks through town without worrying about bumping into anyone. I didn't check the Zillow listing for the house. I didn't ask Odessa for updates on Lorene or Harland or Clara. I taught a small workshop at the library one Thursday evening, something Odessa encouraged. Just 6 women showed up, all in their 40s and 50s. Divorced, widowed, recovering from something no one dared to name aloud. We spoke about setting boundaries, saying no without guilt, speaking even when your voice shook. One woman cried when she said, I used to apologize just for entering a room. I told her, me too. Later that weekend, at the grocery store, while I stood in line with a bag of oranges and a notepad full of ideas for a second workshop, someone tapped me on the shoulder. It was Mrs. Henderson, our old neighbor. She looked me up and down, took in my calm, and smiled. You always were the quiet one, she said. Turns out, you were the one with a backbone. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it felt real. I think it just took me longer to use it, I replied. Word about the letter, Grandma Ruth's letter, had found its way into conversations around town. No gossip, no scandal, just quiet nods and polite shifts in tone when people spoke about Lorene's business. Her investors didn't return. Her expansion stalled. Clara avoided community events altogether, citing overwhelm. Harland kept his same schedule, but looked smaller each time someone passed him in church, without saying hello. I didn't wish them misery. I didn't want revenge. I wanted them to sit with what they'd built, without me. One morning, a month after I'd moved in with Odessa, I sat at her kitchen table and penned a letter of my own. Not to Harland or Clara, or even Lorene. I wrote it for the day one of them might come looking, when denial runs out and silence no longer works. I folded it neatly and slid it into an envelope. I dated it, signed it. I gave it to Odessa and said, keep this, for when they're ready to ask, not when I'm ready to explain. The letter didn't accuse. It didn't rant. It simply listed the truth. Dates, moments, roles played. The quiet work, the hours no one saw. The history they'd written without me, corrected in ink only I knew how to hold. Then I turned the page. I visited the nursery Grandma Ruth used to take me to every spring. The same wooden arches still stood over the front walkway. I walked through slowly, hand trailing over pots of marigolds and rows of hydrangeas, until I stopped in front of a slender cherry blossom sapling. The owner, a soft-spoken man with white hair, asked if I needed help. I told him, just this one. He loaded it into the back of Odessa's car. When we returned, I walked it to the edge of the small plot I'd rented from the community garden project on the east side of town. The soil was already tilled. I dug slowly, pressing the roots into the earth with my bare hands. Odessa watched from a few steps away, holding the watering can. "What's it for?" she asked. "To remember that roots don't care where they're planted," I said, smoothing the dirt around the base. "They just need room." By sunset, the sapling stood alone, thin and unassuming, but upright. And so was I. As I sat on the bench across from it, hands streaked with soil, a breeze moved through the trees behind us. I whispered to the air, just loud enough for myself. They gave the house to someone else, but they'll never again get to decide who I am inside it. Sometimes, we stay too long in places that stopped being home the moment we stopped being seen. I didn't leave my family because I hated them. I left because I finally chose to love myself enough not to stay where I was erased. And that's not bitterness, that's survival. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this. Silence might keep the peace for a while, but it will never bring justice. If your presence is treated like a burden, then maybe your absence will become a mirror. You don't need to scream to be powerful. Sometimes quiet choices, walking away, filing a letter, planting something new, are what reclaim your place in the world. Now, I want to ask you, have you ever felt invisible in a room full of people who should have known your worth? Have you ever given too much and gotten silence in return? I'd love to hear your story. Drop a 1 in the comments if this touched your heart in any way, or tell me where you're watching from. And if you didn't connect with it, tell me why. Every voice deserves to be heard, including yours. If this video spoke to you, or if you want to hear more real, raw, human stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Your support keeps these stories alive and helps them reach the people who need them most. Until next time, take care of yourself. And remember, you don't have to wait for permission to start rewriting your story.